what happened. You want to pull the tape? You can pull the tape because we now got video.
Well, good morning, everybody. It is 8 o'clock up north and 9 a.m. in Boise. We are awaiting the start of the Idaho COVID-19 response study committee. This is the first meeting of this study committee. This was a bill that was passed this last session. Senator Dan Foreman was the sponsor on the Senate side. This was his brainchild, was to try to get to the bottom of the government's response to COVID, to the pandemic during 2020 and 2021. There's a live shot of the committee hearing room, and it looks like everybody is going to be settled in. Scrolling down at the bottom, you'll see the committee's charge. It's to investigate the conduct and overall response of the government of the state of Idaho of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we'll be scrolling through, just showing you the committee members: Foreman, Ehart, Van Orden, Redmond, Bierke, Schertz, Carlson, and Representative Beiswinger, and Senator, and then the two Democrats, Senator Taylor and Representative Egbert. Is it Egbert or Egbert? Are they French? So we're just going to take it live. Keep this shot going live, and we will have a probably a brief wrap up afterwards to cover any wild things that may come up, any revelations that may come up. The agenda for today, we just posted on X over at the Citizens Idaho account. The agenda for today is basically a laundry list of things that they want to explore. There is a difference between this study committee and a sort of hearing that you typically would see as we watch, for instance, the DOJ task force or the Child Protective Services hearings and committees, where they are gathering information from the public on their experiences with the system. This here is a study committee, so you're going to hear Senator Foreman kind of explain how over the summer he has been requesting documents, he's been requesting all sorts of information from various agencies across the state, and then comparing it to the Constitution and seeing if things that were directed to be done were constitutional, and then provide that information in one succinct sort of report in order to move forward. Should something like this happen again, we will have this to look back on. So we all know what we experienced. Those of us in this audience, for sure, feel that we certainly had our rights violated, or at least we witnessed we witnessed things. I mean, there were so many wild things that happened on behalf of the government, and it may not have been the actual state agencies themselves, but when you have, for instance, police departments in local towns arresting people for singing in the streets, that to me sounds like a clear violation of our constitutional rights, especially under a false pretense that this outbreak, this pandemic, was something that was constituted this type of reaction from government agencies. So the two chairs of this committee, you'll have one chair from the Senate, one chair from the House, and so that would be Senator Foreman is co-chair on the Senate side, and Representative Barbara Ehart is the co-chair on the House side. One of the things that did come out of this last session, of course, one of the biggest bills, I mean, this thing just reverberated around the country, was the Idaho Medical Freedom Act, which was a direct response to the vaccine mandates and the directives towards businesses, and kind of like what I would call threats to citizens and businesses. And that passed and was vetoed at first by the governor. And then there was the story behind getting that second bill passed should be told someday. And we'll hopefully get into that this coming session. It'd be nice to do that. That was being brought by Senator Foreman, who worked with Rob Beiswinger on the House side to get those bills passed. And so now we live in that world. It is now 9:04 in Boise. This meeting, of course, was scheduled to begin at the top of the hour, but these meetings sometimes are not as prompt as promised. But we will continue to carry this live throughout the end of the show, or the end of their meeting. We do invite you to leave comments if you're watching on YouTube or X or Facebook. I believe you can leave a comment and we can throw it up on screen. I'm not sure if the comments are connected to Rumble yet, but if you leave a comment on Rumble, and it may show up in the we might be able to put it on screen. So if you have questions or if you have comments or feedback as you're watching.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the COVID study.
All right, here we go.
Committee's in order. We have a quorum and a silent roll is being taken. Purpose of this committee is very specific, limited, and refined. We've been tasked to review the actions of state government with respect to its response to the COVID situation, with strict emphasis on whether Idaho State Code and or the U.S. or state constitutions were violated. Our task is not to assign blame or insinuate wrongdoing on the part of individuals or state agencies. Neither are we attempting to improve or rewrite internal policy procedures for the various state agencies with respect to pandemic or emergency responses and procedures. Our mission is simply to find the truth with respect to our specific tasking and then present it in an unbiased manner for review by the people of Idaho. While the committee has study and reference materials from multiple qualified sources at its disposal, the committee is not obligated to decide relevant issues before the committee solely based on those externally supplied materials. The committee is free to formulate its own decisions and vote accordingly. The committee's final report will be delivered to the second regular session of the 68th Idaho Legislature in January of 2026. The report will bear the signatures of both co-chairs and will provide a strictly factually based and accurate accounting of the committee's deliberations and conclusions. Committee members are free to write dissenting or minority reports in whole or in part that will become part of the official public record associated with this study committee's work. Mr. Kyle Slominski of the Legislative Services Office will assist the committee with preparing those reports. Our committee agendas have been published and reference materials have been distributed to each committee member. There is great flexibility built into our committee proceedings. After discussion, debate, and voting on the initial 6 agenda questions, we will freely entertain discussion, debate, and voting on any additional questions introduced by the committee members. All voices will be heard and all concerns will be addressed. Thank you for your willingness to participate in and contribute to this important study committee. And thank you to Kyle Slominski, Research and Legislation Division, Francis Lippett, Budget Analysis Division, Alex Hatfield, Impact Review Team, Lacey Sylvie, Legislative Library, and our Secretary, Jennifer Kish, for their outstanding and professional assistance to the committee. Their work has taken place over many months and has been instrumental in preparing us for a successful committee process. As a note, the chair will be asking for roll call votes on every vote. And at this time, Co-Chair Ehart would like to address the committee.
Thank you very much, Chairman and committee, and those who may be listening. Couple of quick thoughts. The first one is one of the things that I realized that had come out of this that maybe we didn't have prior is now we do have compiled with great work from LSO, all in one place, all things relating to COVID through the state of Idaho. I think there's actually great value in that. And I commend Senator Foreman on his foresight and his leadership with LSO, basically in guiding that and helping to bring that forward. And again, all in one place. I think there's something to be said about that. As I sit here on this committee, I'm not sure but I was the only one serving at the time. I'm not sure if anybody else was serving at the time of COVID. And so I do have a couple of thoughts that I think I'll share now, because I definitely understand the value of this committee. And, I want it to also be known that there were, I think, a lot of reasons for the initial shutdown. And the shutdown, of course, started outside the state of Idaho, and it just permeated like a virus. And I believe that it permeated with fear. I certainly can only speak for me. Personally, I was never in favor of it. I fought it. I was sad for ourselves in Idaho Falls and worked and did all I could to help get certainly the business where I was working up and running as quickly as possible. But, it was interesting to see how many people fought to have things shut down. How many people that we'd call experts from the medical field, legal field, schools, especially schools, wanted to be shut down. And individuals, I'll even say this, on my way back the last week before we actually Sine died here in 2020, in March, the end of March, I was on the phone driving back here and speaking with a constituent who also was a friend, who also would be considered incredibly conservative, far right. And this friend was very upset, wanting to know why the schools were still open. I was shocked. What do you mean, why are the schools still open? Because the kids need to go to school. That's why the schools are still open. But essentially running with the fear mongering that had taken place, referencing Italy, Wuhan. And I just remember telling this constituent, we don't even know what has happened yet. We have no idea. If we'll all just calm down, we'll eventually figure it out, which we did. But in the meantime, through a lot of discussions, I want to share one other discussion that I remember having. We started having phone calls as legislators with the governor and then certain people that he'd invite on. I remember it was in November and I was at a conference and we were listening to two doctors, and they were addressing all of those of us who are on this phone call as legislators. And I'm paraphrasing, but these doctors told us, and let me tell you, even before I tell you what they said, I was on that phone pushing the button because I wanted to respond. And these doctors told us as legislators that we needed to quit worrying about the Constitution and people's rights and start worrying about people living and dying. And I was absolutely appalled at that and got on there and said so. And so this is what we're surrounded with, both as people, as a state, as a governing body. And so I just wanted to mention, as I had also spent time with my friend and former Representative Julianne Young, as we spoke about this, that there were a lot of people putting pressure to also shut things down, people and entities. So I just want to make sure as we go forward through this that we also keep this in mind, because I certainly wasn't a fan of that, but I want to be very clear that the responsibility with this, I believe, rests with a lot of people. And with that, again, Senator Foreman, we thank you for the work that you've done to get us to this point. And if I may, as a reminder to the committee members, when Senator Foreman will be conducting this for the most part, you do not have to address him as co-chair. Whoever has the mic, so right now, for example, I am the chairman. When he has the mic, he would be the chairman, so you can just address him as a chairman. So with that, I would cede my time back, and I thank you.
Thank you, Representative Ehart. Would you like to make your motion to clarify that one point that you mentioned?
Thank you very much. Yes, committee, I have a suggestion that I would like to, I suppose I'd like to make a motion that in making motions for any of these questions before us, and given the setup that I just used, I don't feel comfortable laying everything, given what I just explained, using the term governor. So I would suggest that when making the motion, if you're in favor of this, that we would say governor, executive branch, and the state of Idaho, because there were so many entities involved in some of the regulations and shutdowns that had a part and were responsible for that which occurred. And so I would suggest that we use the term governor, executive branch, and state of Idaho. Thank you.
Committee, do we have a second on the motion?
Second.
All right, committee, we have a motion by Representative Ehart, seconded by Representative Redmond, to make a change to the preamble, so to speak, of the likely motions we'll have, rather than just saying, did this action by the governor, et cetera, we'll say by the governor, the executive branch, and the state of Idaho. Committee, any debate or discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Van Orden.
Yes, okay, so in our documents, when you gave us the language, is that right? For the motions. Trying to find that document that you had sent. This. Do we have a copy of that?
It's on the back of your agenda.
On the back page. That's it.
Okay, so can we get where it says recommended motion format, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And that is simply a recommendation. The committee, each member is of course free to make any legitimate motion that he or she would see proper to make.
Trying to get my pencil to work. Okay. So that one, could we have that repeated one more time, please?
Sure. Instead of just where we have the word governor in the recommended motion, it would be governor, executive branch, and the state of Idaho. So 3 entities versus the 1.
Thank you.
Any further debate, committee? Seeing none, if our secretary would commence with a roll call vote, please.
Sorry, Senator Foreman,
Yes.
Representative Ehart,
Yes.
Senator Van Orden,
Yes.
Representative Redmond,
Yes.
Senator Bierke, Representative Schertz,
Yes.
thank you. Senator Carlson,
Yes.
Representative Beiswenger,
Yes.
Senator Taylor,
Yes.
and Representative Egbert.
All right, thank you. It's unanimous. We have 10 yeses and 0 nos. So the motion carries. It shall be so reflected in the minutes, and we will honor that when we get to that stage in the committee proceedings. That brings us to the beginning of the agenda items. Item A is in alpha. And for the committee and for all those listening, item alpha is, did the closing of houses of worship by the governor, the executive branch, and the state of Idaho violate state code and/or U.S. or state constitutions? Chair will entertain debate and discussion on that question. The chair will add something here. My thoughts on that. Closing the houses of worship is a serious step, but COVID was a serious situation. And the information that decision makers had early on was pretty dire and confusing. That was refined and amplified later in the COVID situation, but initially things did look pretty dire. So I think that decision in the state of Idaho was made with the best of intentions in order to help protect people. And the government does have an intense and overriding concern with protecting the citizens of the state of Idaho. However, on the other side of the coin, it's my reading of the U.S. Constitution that the Bill of Rights delineates our God-given rights, and they are inalienable rights, meaning they didn't come from the government to begin with. They didn't come from man, they came from the Almighty. Now, some people will take a different approach to that, but that's my interpretation and understanding. And if they are inalienable rights, that means you and I can never be separated from those rights, even in an emergency. So it puts us in a very unusual situation here. COVID was monumental, probably the biggest thing to hit the United States and Idaho since World War II. And it involved government having to make serious, heavyweight decisions that directly interfaced with our constitutional rights. It's my position on this question that the First Amendment right of the U.S. Constitution, free exercise of religion, was indeed violated. And I think most of the court decisions from the Supreme Court all the way on down will bear that out. However, the courts seem to temper their assessment by saying, however, the government did have a bona fide interest in and responsibility to protect the public. I think Section 1 of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which, and I'm paraphrasing to a degree here, it says no state may enforce any law that abridges the privileges of the citizens of the United States. I think that was violated. I think Article 1, Section 3 of the Idaho Constitution, which states the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land, was violated. I think Article 1, Section 4 of the Idaho Constitution, exercise of religious faith is forever guaranteed, was violated. I think Idaho Code 73-401 was violated, and it states the state may not substantially burden a person's exercise of religion. So there we have it. The 25 March 2020 order to self-isolate prohibited non-essential gatherings, including gatherings for spiritual reasons. Essential businesses or businesses deemed essential were allowed to remain open. Houses of worship were not mentioned in the list of essential businesses. So the way I see it, there was a violation of the U.S. Constitution, the state constitution, and also state code. Again, well-intended. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone or blaming anyone. I'm sure everyone involved did what he or she thought they had to do to protect people. So my assertion is there were violations, but this issue now is open for discussion. Oh, Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree that the COVID at the initial outset was very fast and very full of confusing information. And I don't debate the fact that there might have been some overstep in our rights, but I would like to also mention the fact that we didn't necessarily say people couldn't practice their religion. We just said we're closing houses of worship, and all houses of worship were treated equally. So there wasn't one put over another. And we didn't say you could not practice your religion. We just said you couldn't do it in a group. And the thought process at the time was that if we could have separation, we might be able to get ahead of this particular virus. So yes, I think that closing the houses of worship crossed the line, but I think maybe, in my opinion, we didn't tell people they couldn't worship the way they wanted to worship. We didn't tell them they could not practice their religion.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate your comments. Any further discussion? Okay, now I know all of you folks. I know you all pretty well. I'll get you a representative. And I understand the touchy nature of this, all the proceedings we're going to talk about. But we're here. And I know darn well you have opinions because I know you guys. You wouldn't be in the legislature if you didn't have opinions. And this is the time and place. All I ask is that we be civil about it. And I also ask that you give us your honest opinion. There's not going to be any repercussions. The only repercussions would come if we didn't discuss this and live up to our charter. Representative Beiswinger, I saw your light on.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Early in the morning, out of practice for the hearings, I guess. I mean, if you want opinions here, I mean, obviously, people practice their faith. They do it different ways. It's because it is a right. It's not for the government to say, well, I've got some good intentions, so now I'm going to stop you from doing it. Intention, can be good or bad. That's sort of delving into someone's state of mind when they're making it. People can act out of fear. They can act out of, benevolence or whatever, but you have rights in place, so they can't be violated. And we're acknowledging those rights. As our system of government, you can't abridge your freedom of speech, getting together, worshiping, Second Amendment rights. Those are rights. Those aren't things we can just give up because we're scared. In these days, with social media and just an ability to communicate with people so easily, it seems like even a greater overreaction because the government could communicate really easily with all of us in a heartbeat. You could do a Facebook video, an X video, Instagram. You could put all out there, say, here's what we're seeing, guys. Maybe you don't want to go to church this week. Maybe we need to take a break and see what happens here. But to have people declare a state of emergency, right after the legislature was in session and not really involve them, at least that's what it seemed to me. I wasn't here at the time. And then to have these, all these restrictions put in place, which were really unprecedented and continued like that, that's definitely a violation, and good intentions are not. It shouldn't have happened, and we need to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Thank you, Representative. Any further discussion? Senator Bierke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've wrestled with a lot of this, and I'll probably say some things that pertain to a lot of what we're going to be dealing with today, maybe specifically on a particular item, or maybe just in a general sense. I was somebody who was really taken aback by how we, as a state, handled things initially. But I mean, to the point where my first bill was a visitation bill. That was very important to me, that we had people that were in hospitals that on their deathbeds were not able to hold the hands of their loved ones. I think there were, we can identify several things today as we go through this, but I've had a look back, and part of that look back is, as a state, we've pretty much addressed everything legislatively, in statute, through bills, to address any concerns that I see that we're going to address here today. I think we've made great strides, but the biggest thing I think about, and again, I know we're not placing blame. I might even have done a substitute motion to take governor and executive branch in state of Idaho and just make it the state of Idaho. But my overarching thought on this whole thing is that if there's blame to be placed, it's to be placed on what I consider to be somewhat of a global effort, and at the federal level. And anytime we address something that we have done or didn't do appropriate at the state level, it was us wrestling with what the federal government was telling us to do. And I think that's a really fine line and a tightrope to expect any state government to walk, especially when we are tied to the federal government financially. They have a tremendous amount of leverage over us. You know, and I've given a lot of thought about all this stuff. And I realized that we had migration that took place during COVID and post-COVID. People went to states that they felt were more free than where they were coming from. And I look back at this in a general sense, and we're going to address all these issues. We did a pretty good job here in Idaho, comparatively, when you looked at what we had to deal with. We were put upon, we were directed, we were leveraged, we were influenced by what our federal government was telling us we had to do. And we had to make our citizens follow suit. But we still remain one of the more freer states in this union. And for that, I'm very appreciative of what we did here. And I think I want to take that into account as we go through this. Again, we've done a lot to remedy statute to ensure that at least as a state, we've addressed these issues and said, we are not going to allow this to happen again. But I also fear that no matter what we've put in statute, we are again, at some point in our history, potentially going to be subject to that overbearing federal government telling us what to do and leveraging us once again. And that's my fear. But I think we've done a great job of addressing each of these issues. We may identify another statute or a bill. You know, we can't have vaccine mandates anymore. We can't have mask mandates. I mean, we've done some great things here. I just want to let the case be known from at least my perspective for somebody who is, you know, really upset about things that happened during COVID that took away our freedoms, to just express how pleased I was, especially looking back at it, that the state of Idaho handled this pandemic probably better than any other state in the union. I think we should acknowledge that.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate those words, and I agree. In 2021, the legislature did alter Idaho codes to build in sideboards and safeguards with respect to executive branch emergency action procedures and powers. My reading of the original code kind of impressed upon me that the code was loosely written, which acts to the detriment of all concerned, especially the decision makers. If they don't have clear guidelines and sideboards on exactly what their emergency powers are, they can do nothing but use their own good judgment, which they did. And I agree with the senator that Idaho did a pretty darn good job, all things considered. The area of state and federal government interface is, to be nice, interesting. I have serious issues with some of the misinformation that I think came out and the pressure that was placed upon our officials to do things. And they had a tough job because of it. But any further discussions? Representative, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to those of you who have spoken already, and those of you that did have to be in this body during that time. I'm sure that there were very, very difficult decisions that had to be made, and I appreciate you doing it. I would really like to thank LSO for the work that they did in preparing us for this. This is a phenomenal amount of information, and they compiled it in a way that is actually very easy to read and understand. And we had the great fortune of getting what I consider to be a very thorough and accurate legal analysis. I did just want to point out that on this specific question, a lot of this analysis rests on this case that went up to the Supreme Court out of California, this Tandon case. And I did just want to note that in that case, we're not talking about apples to apples really here. In that case, it was specifically looking at California's limit for home gatherings for religious purposes, where it allowed people to run business out of their homes, like hair salons, but it didn't allow more than 3 families to gather and worship together. But the reason I think that that difference is important is because what we're really looking at here is what came out of this case and why this legal analysis says that probably when we first issued the order, it was okay, but probably it wouldn't be by today's standards, is because of this analysis of was it more dangerous and likely that COVID could be spread in businesses that were allowed to stay open in Idaho than it would have been in houses of worship. And I think that the conclusion I've come to is that we honestly just don't know. We don't have the facts because this has not come before a court. There hasn't been an opportunity for anybody to talk about, did they consider if interactions in houses of worship would have been longer than they would have been in other businesses like a gas station? Or are there ventilation differences? Or were the activities conducted in houses of worship different than the activities conducted in a grocery store? And I'm just not sure. I don't know that they did that analysis. They probably didn't, because at that time, that's not the analysis that they would have had to even do. But I'm not sure that I even have enough information to do that analysis myself. So I just wanted to make that statement.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Redmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with a lot of the comments that have been made already, that, you know, it was an uncertain time and there was a number of things that we were all figuring out. I do think that Idaho's made great strides in the efforts that we've done since that. And I think that that is something that we can see from COVID is, you know, we can turn and try to find the good in how we learned from that. And hopefully our state has hardened ourselves so that in the future, if there is another pandemic or another issue like that, we do observe our state's rights and don't allow the federal government to push down different, different restrictions on us. So I do think that Idaho's made a lot of effort, and I appreciate you for setting up this committee. And I guess I'll start with a motion, please.
Motion is in order.
Oh. Okay. I would move that on our first question, that the state of Idaho did violate our First Amendment right in the free exercise of religion with the closure of houses of worship.
Do we have a second? Senator Carlson seconds. So committee, we have a motion from Representative Redmond that you made the comment state of Idaho. Did you wish to expand that as per our original change and say the executive branch, governor, executive branch in state of Idaho? Is that what you meant? Or did you just want it to be state of Idaho?
I'm good with just the state of Idaho.
Okay, so the motion is committee, the state of Idaho did violate state code and the US and or state constitution, but I need clarification there. Did you refer, I don't remember, to all three, or did you just say constitutional violation?
I said the First Amendment Constitution.
Okay, so the motion is, did the state of Idaho did violate our First Amendment constitutional rights. Committee chair will entertain a discussion and or debate on that motion. Oh, Co-Chair Ehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I definitely want to take an opportunity to express a couple thoughts on this. I have long championed our First Amendment rights. I feel there's a reason that our First and Second Amendment rights in the Bill of Rights are first and second. And I believe that our First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to assemble, along with others, are incredibly important. I do not believe that there was ambiguity in the Constitution as to what these rights mean. And I will admit, over all the rights, this one probably during the COVID shutdown upset me the most. I was particularly upset to think even though you may see this example as being one of business. But I was particularly upset to think that liquor stores could be open and people could gather, and yet we couldn't at a time. See, again, keeping this in perspective, at a time when the country was feeling afraid, whatever words we might want to throw in there, afraid, concerned, worried. We needed our religion and our places of worship more than ever. We needed community. I know that it was said that we weren't stopped from being worship. Well, of course not. We can, heaven forbid that we end up like Europe, where, if you're standing, not even saying anything outside a Planned Parenthood or whatever they call it, a baby abortion site, and you get arrested because you're asked, even though you're saying nothing, if you're praying and you admit, you go to jail. I mean, surely we're not going to get to that point. So of course I can pray in my home, but the ability to gather with like-minded people and to have the power of prayer and the power of sharing thoughts together, that just, was very upsetting to me. It also was very upsetting to me with my own church at how quickly we capitulated. And so I'll just say, of course, we did work on making quick amendments with having Zoom church meetings, but that just wasn't the same. And so this is definitely one where I believe the state of Idaho absolutely failed our people. And of course, through the leadership and help of our majority leader now with Jason Monks, 391 was the piece of legislation that basically said you cannot suspend constitutional rights. And I think that was already clear, but now of course we've doubled down with that legislation to make it clear. Hopefully, as everyone has said, going forward, we will understand that, because I believe it's something like this is going to happen again. And, it's not even, with my good colleague who I admire so much, it's not even just about the states' rights and the national federal government interfering with the states' rights, or, the CDC or the WHO. It's about our individual rights. They cannot be infringed upon. And so with that, I will be supporting this motion.
Thank you. Senator Van Orden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I need a clarification a little bit on this. So the motion, can we get it repeated, please, from the secretary?
I believe the correct wording was, the state of Idaho did violate our First Amendment constitutional rights by closing houses of worship.
Okay. Then may I ask the maker a question, please?
Certainly.
Representative Redmond, are we referring to what Chair Ehart just referred to of gathering, not the establishment of religion?
Representative.
Yes, into gathering the free exercise of religion.
Okay. Thank you for clarification. A statement, just.
Go ahead, Senator.
I guess I'm kind of torn here, because the right to gather, I understand that, the violation. But to be able to, freedom of religion to practice and to keep going, I don't think was violated. I don't think there was any move to keep us from actually doing that. As Chair Ehart had said, within our shared religion, there had been accommodations made well prior to when COVID hit, to be able to still do things in our homes, to practice our religion in our homes. So I'm quite torn on this question at this time. I have to think more about it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Senator. Representative Redmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And maybe I can clarify the thought behind it is, I think oftentimes the freedom of religion, personally, I believe I can express that directly with my Lord and Savior. However, I think oftentimes, in the Bible, we're called to, in my religion of Christianity, we're called to gather together and hold church services and that. And so I think that's what I mean as impeding on the freedom of that. If we weren't able to gather together, it could, interfere with my practice, I would say.
Thank you, Representative. The chair's looking at three things here on a personal level. The action taken, the intent of whoever took the action, in this case, closing the houses of worship, and the effect it had. And from what I'm hearing, it's really difficult, and I understand why, for people to separate those three things out. The action, in my opinion, violated the Constitution. And I think, in the opinion of all the court cases I looked at, the courts agreed. The intent in the case of the state of Idaho and our decision makers was solid, 100% virtuous, pure. They wanted to help people. The effect, who knows? Did it help? Did it not help? We know a lot more about COVID now than we did then, but the seminal question here is not, did it help? Not even what their intentions were when they made the decisions. The question is, were constitutional rights violated? My opinion is yes, they were violated for obvious reasons. Any further debate? I see a light on there, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to speak to my vote, I understand the question here that we're really supposed to be grappling with is whether houses of worship were treated differently than other businesses. The reality is that even if they were treated differently, that doesn't make it unconstitutional if it could have still been upheld under strict scrutiny. So I just want to clarify there that just because houses of worship were treated differently does not mean that it was unconstitutional. My challenge here is I think it very likely could have been. I'm going to vote no on this motion only because I just do not feel like I have enough information to do that analysis. There could have been a valid reason why they were treated differently. And unfortunately, I just have not found that information. So this one's going to be a no for me.
Thank you, Representative. Any further debate? Yep. Senator, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. More of an explanation of my vote. Again, without placing blame, looking at it purely kind of clinical. Yes, our First Amendment right to gather and to have free expression of our religion was impinged upon. And, again, that was a global thing. I mean, it persisted in Canada for long after it persisted here. And I look at this strictly that way. If we're analyzing something from a legal perspective, from our Constitution and from our state Constitution basis, yes, our freedom of religion was infringed upon, and it went against our state and our federal Constitution.
Thank you, Senator. Any further comments? Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've kind of been taught to go to the source. So going to our Constitution and looking at Amendment 1 on the Bill of Rights, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And of course, then the abridging, we do need to understand that anytime you restrict religion and the ability to speak, you also then violate the next one, abridging the freedom of speech. You then violate the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. I feel that actually in shutting down our places of worship, we violated more than just the freedom of religion. We violated multiple parts of the First Amendment.
Thank you, Representative. Any further? Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to put a little definition on my vote here. I am also having a difficult time parsing out the different pieces of our First Amendment, because I look at this as we did not infringe on people's right to practice their religion. We did infringe upon the right to assembly. So lumping these all together for me is making it a very, very difficult way to go forward. We've seen that the use of Zoom and Google Meets and everything allows people to do things remotely, and that's become the norm. I see that happen with religions all of the time. On Sunday mornings, you can stay at home and still go to church. You can practice your religion, and you've chosen to assemble in a different place. So for me, I think that this could probably use a little bit more legal analysis before a decision is made definitively. But my vote will be a no on this.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Schertz, I see your hand is up on the screen. Would you like to comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Can you guys hear me all right?
We can hear you just fine. Can you hear us?
Getting head nods. There we go. I know I'm here big on the screen. You know, I think this is probably, as I read through the legal analysis, probably the biggest question we'll have to face. Naturally, though, you know, with hindsight's always 20/20, right? We're always looking back to COVID, and we wish we could go through because we probably do it differently. But fundamentally, when, you know, a house of worship is closed, I think there is potential for a violation there. And I think that's what, you know, in this case, when the state did that, I think we have the potential for a violation. I'll be voting yes on this. But what I want to say, I went to California for a military trip about a year after COVID started. And I went to church there. I went to Mass. And it was about the first, it was literally that week was the first time they'd been allowed back in the church in the state of California. And we had been going back to church, you know, for months and months in Idaho. I was very grateful for Idaho's leadership. Obviously, I think, you know, no response was perfect, but thank goodness we weren't in California or in other states. But I think a part of our COVID study committee is not just focusing on things, you know, we did wrong, but also things that we probably did right. And I think we led the nation in a lot of ways too. But I think on this specific issue, I think any closure is a potential for a constitutional violation.
Thank you, Representative. I don't see any other lights on. So if our secretary, for the edification of the committee, would please reread the motion and then commence with a roll call vote, please.
A motion made by Representative Redmond and seconded by Senator Carlson. The state of Idaho did violate our First Amendment constitutional rights by closing houses of worship. Senator Foreman, how do you vote?
Aye.
Representative Ehart.
Yes.
Senator Van Orden.
Yes.
Representative Redmond.
Yes.
Senator Bierke. Representative Schertz.
Yeah.
Senator Carlson. Representative Beiswinger.
Yes.
Senator Taylor.
No.
Representative Egbert.
No.
The vote shows 8 in favor and 2 against.
Thank you. The motion carries and the final report will reflect that. Moving on to agenda item B as in boy. I will read it for the committee. Did the closing of businesses by the governor, the executive branch, and the state of Idaho violate state code and/or the U.S. or state constitutions? Chair will entertain discussion on that question. The chair can start things rolling here. businesses were closed for 37 days, from 25 March 2020 to 1 May 2020. And there were restrictions as to gatherings and internal operations of businesses from 25 March 2020 until 11 May 2021. This is my opinion, but as a member of the committee, I guess I'm entitled to an opinion, so I'll voice it. I think a better solution, rather than closing the businesses, would have been to inform the people of the health threat and let them decide as to their own protective measures and actions with respect to the closing of their businesses. The 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution states, "No state shall make or enforce any law that shall abridge the privileges of citizens, nor shall any state deprive any citizen of life, liberty, or property without due process." Article 1, Section 1 of the Idaho Constitution is titled Inalienable Rights of Man. Section states all men have inalienable rights, which include acquiring, possessing, and protecting property. I think the business closings may have been an overreaction, and they did inflict serious financial harm to many. All business restrictions should have been dropped after the state received more detailed information showing the COVID virus was not deadly. Supreme Court Justice Alito, in a 2020 dissenting opinion, stated that deference to government's intrusion into constitutional rights could really not be tolerated once more medical and scientific evidence becomes available and states have time to craft policies in light of that evidence. Again, we're kind of back in the same boat. Did it encroach on constitutional rights by telling a man or woman you can't open your business, which could potentially hurt your livelihood and hurt your ability to provide for your family? My personal answer to that is yes. It is a constitutional violation. However, we're back again, like I said, in the same boat. I think, to be fair, we have to point out that our decision makers weren't getting the best information from Washington, D.C., and they did have a very serious need and commitment that they had to honor to the people to try to keep them safe. So again, I think the decisions made were with the best of intentions, but again, technically speaking, if I'm told I can't go to my place of business and open up and earn a living, does that violate my constitutional rights as expressed in the U.S. Constitution and more specifically the state constitution? I think it does. So, committee, that's what I think. What do you think? Senator Carlson?
Thank you, Chairman. We had employees, federal employees, state employees who I believe continued to be paid during that time. And in the bigger corporations, those people were paid as well. You had essential businesses, which in this documentation, I haven't found a definition for essential or non-essential, but we had essential businesses being able to work and continue to make money. We had internet-based companies that made millions of dollars during that time while small businesses were affected. And so I would agree with your statements.
Thank you, Senator. Any further discussion from committee members? Representative, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I respectfully have to disagree a little bit on that. We're in the same boat on this one. For the first question, even for me, it was very, very squishy because we were talking about a fundamental right and a different level of scrutiny. Here, I think it's very clear that the police powers, that under police powers, we had the authority to do this because all that we're looking for here is a legitimate government interest. And I think that the courts would agree on this one, that there clearly was a legitimate government interest in stopping the spread of the virus with the information they had at that time. that early on in the stages of COVID. So for me, this one is a little bit more clear.
Thank you, Representative. Any further comments from the committee? Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand that last statement, but in looking at this, maybe if this had been broken down into segments, I can tell you from day one, I did not buy into that which we are doing. I was, not happy when I got home and my place of work was shut down, especially a place of work that really helped, being an athletic facility that helped with mental health and the very thing that people needed during this time of stress. But more than that, I remember, going to Walmart, going to, some of the big, larger open stores. They were open, and our smaller mom and pops that could sell the very same thing, that tried to sell the very same thing, that wanted to sell the very same thing, weren't allowed to. And the distinction there absolutely baffled me. Absolutely baffled me. Why did Walmart and oh my goodness, I can't even think Fred Meyer and what was the place where all the tools anyway, Home Depot. Why did they get, as a matter of fact, I spent a lot of time going from one place to the other just because I wasn't going to, stay in my house. Why did they get to be open? And then so many of our small hardware stores were closed. And as I said before, the other thing that was frustrating was, of all things, the liquor store got to be open. That was just really hard. Now, I had a conversation with myself and said, all right, let's wait this out for 2 weeks. But those 2 weeks started to be extended. Our president didn't even want to keep extending things and started talking about opening sooner. And oh my goodness, nationally, the powers that be. But the unique thing about our states, and certainly I commend Idaho for coming back more quickly than many of the other states, that we don't have to do, we're sovereign. We don't have to do what the federal government and Fauci and others said. But this one was really hard, because in a situation like we are experiencing, I think one of the worst things that hurt obviously our children, but also families, and I suppose there was good and bad because the families got to be together, but sitting around doing nothing. If you remember, we weren't even supposed to go out to the parks. And I have a park right across the street from me where children play. And the city of Idaho Falls had quarantined part of that off, like, don't come touch the toys. Why? It was outside, walking the greenbelt. Even if you're 6 feet apart, people, if you pass each other, it was like, oh my goodness, all of a sudden everybody's becoming suspect of everyone else. And I just felt like it wasn't as a time of coming together as much a time of suspicion and pushing away. And so these are just some of my thoughts in looking at what happened with the businesses. I don't think it was good. But on the flip side, I was in contact with our governor's office, and we were working on getting things open sooner rather than later. And the governor's office was very good, as I was particularly, of course, working I worked on others too, but also getting our business open and jumping through whatever hoops we felt was necessary so that we could open and not only get back to business, but start serving the people. So with all of that, again, so many unknowns, but this was very frustrating to me also.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Weiswinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to sort of piggyback a little bit on what you said, that I think if the state had stayed to recommendations and not mandates and closures, we had a much better outcome and more equitable. People could have made decisions that way, could just taken the information and acted accordingly. In Horseshoe Bend, where I'm from, there were people who, there's a restaurant in town and the owners were there, even though there was these closures. And there were people calling the police and calling the government, reporting on them, telling, hey, they're not allowed to be here. Well, really, this was their own property. They were at their own restaurant. They weren't even customers. They were just hanging out on the patio outside because what else are you going to do? You know, you can't serve people, you can't run your business. So, I mean, what else are they supposed to do? We just had kind of an insanity going around here, and people reporting in. I talked to people who were on construction sites and they weren't far enough away, and which maybe a little bit different than I guess the business closure thing, but still it's just sort of a, kind of a nanny state. Basically created like a snitch line where now we got the police trying to come to enforce business closures, people on their own private property. And, I don't know if anyone ever thought when they wrote the U.S. Constitution, we would need to write a provision in there that we're allowed to go into business. I mean, you have to. I mean, if you're, whether you're, providing animal feed or electricity or whatever you do for your livelihood, you've got to do that to pay your mortgage and stuff like that, and have the government interfere with it based on really, bad information. And I think we need to realize that, be careful who we're listening to, and realize they can make their decisions could affect it in such an adverse way. They're talking about, there's the intention here of that they could help out. There's also the intention that led to these decisions caused people to commit suicide, and people lost their jobs, people got divorced, children not going to schools. I mean, so forth. There was a really negative effect here. So it's not just like they took some innocuous thing trying to do it. There was a big consequence for it. And really, we need to look going forward. I think that we can't allow that to happen. They need to make recommendations, share information, and people can go out and do what they want and be responsible, for their own decisions.
Thank you, Representative. Any further comments? Senator Bjerke?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Debating on whether I opine or not, but I find this second question very similar to the first, and my feelings on it will be very similar. Again, I think government at the highest levels really let down the people in this country and across the globe. Again, but looking at some of these tightrope walkings that had to happen with some folks that were trying to do their best. I'm not going to place blame. There was a lot of money here. If you look at the grand total of 20 billion plus of things that our government was hoping to alleviate the pain and suffering that was caused by these orders. But the bottom line, nobody should ever be hindered from being able to work and provide for themselves and their families. And I hope this never happens again.
Thank you, Senator. Any further comments?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Taylor.
Thank you. I just would like to point out that my interpretation of this is that when the closures were ordered, that they were supported by scientific evidence and public health recommendations. Now, whether or not that scientific evidence or those recommendations were correct at the time, they were put forth on the best of knowledge that we had going right then and there. So limiting those gatherings at the time was thought to reduce that spread of the virus. I think in looking at Idaho Code 46601 and 46108, there's a little bit of a discrepancy there that I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around, because in the state of extreme emergency, it says any unnecessary restriction, but in the disaster emergencies, you also have the authority to control the occupancy of premises within that disaster area. And our whole state was a disaster area. So I'm not quite sure where I fall on this one. I think that both of those statutes might need to be looked at and be clarified a little bit. Yes, people were put out of work. I believe that they also had the opportunity to be compensated by the federal government, as much as we don't like to take money from the federal government. There was an avenue. It might not have been exactly what they would have made, but they did have that opportunity to be compensated that way. But I just wanted to point out that potential discrepancy in those two different codes. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any further? Senator or Representative Redmond?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along those same lines, I think there was violations because I think it significantly inhibited, if not totally disrupted, what people's ability to earn a living. And I think that had a number of consequences, as well as I think a number of those businesses, as Representative Ehart mentioned, are no longer in business. And so the sort of the destruction that we saw from that has been, very difficult for our state at least to deal with. And again, echoing some of the other things that some of the other colleagues have said, that Idaho has made a lot of those changes, and we've corrected some of those, but we're talking about this specific question. And so I do believe there was a violation. And so for a motion.
Motion is in order. Go ahead, Representative.
So on question 2, did closing businesses by the state of Idaho violate the U.S. Constitution? And I would say yes, it did. I would probably go off of the Fifth Amendment with closing those businesses constituted a taking without compensation.
Thank you, Representative. Do we have a second? Second by Senator Yerke. Committee, discussion or debate on the motion? Hearing none, if our secretary, just for the edification of the committee, would please reread the motion and then begin a roll call vote, please.
Item B, did the closing of businesses by the state of Idaho violate U.S. Constitution? Senator Foreman,
Aye.
Representative Ehart,
Yes.
Senator Van Orden,
Aye.
Representative Redmond,
Yes.
Senator Bierke, Representative Schertz,
Yeah.
Did he say? Secretary, were you able to copy that? I couldn't understand.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
thank you, thank you, Representative Schertz.
Thank you.
Senator Carlson, Representative Beisfinger,
Yes.
Senator Taylor,
Yes.
Representative Egbert. The vote shows 9-1.
Thank you. The motion carries, and it shall be reflected in the final report. Moving on to item C as in Charlie. Did the order of the governor or the executive branch or the state of Idaho for a statewide quarantine violate state code and/or the U.S. or state constitutions? Chair will entertain discussion on that question at this time. The chair can jump in here with a quick comment. With respect to this question, I think the answer is yes, our constitutional rights were violated. The First and 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution guarantee freedom of assembly. Article 1, Section 10 of the Idaho Constitution protects freedom of assembly. The self-isolate order, which was issued by the then Director of Health and Welfare, was from 25 March 2020 to 1 May 2020. Now, Idaho Code 56-1003, which was in effect during 2020, actually did not place restrictions on the Director of Health and Welfare with respect to placing quarantines on citizens. That code was amended in 2021 to put sideboards on the code and put restrictions. Specifically, the order must be for a specific person who's been diagnosed with an infectious or communicable disease, but that was not in place in 2020. Currently, the quarantines must also be for a reasonable period of time sufficient to determine if the person will become sick. One would have to assume that, and I think quite correctly, that the legislature in 2021 reacted to what they thought was a loosely or poorly written section of code when they put the current sideboards into effect. It's my opinion, and it's just my opinion, that there were those stated violations of code or of both the federal and state constitution. So that is my opinion. What are the opinions of the committee, Representative, or excuse me, Representative Beiswinger? Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I could repeat what I said before, but maybe I'll skip that. But yeah, there's just, lots of side effects, but quarantines seem to me that's to be where you're quarantining sick people. And what was done was quarantining people who weren't necessarily sick, or they couldn't show that we're sick. So it's just kind of a sort of, it goes against the term of quarantine and what it's supposed to do. So, I mean, I could kind of argue it's like in-home imprisonment for everyone at that point. So I definitely think that's wrong. It's one thing maybe to consider taking a sick person and asking them to, quarantine, but just quarantining everyone who isn't sick, I think is a violation.
Thank you, Representative. Any further discussion or debate on this question? Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gosh, maybe I have a lot of thoughts. And I'm going to share this one. Two varying thoughts here. As we were supposed to quarantine and keep a great distance, I remember on the 4th of July of 2020, and I thought, is this the beginning where our celebration of freedoms stop? We had canceled the parade and the fireworks that night. And I was walking around my block and, just pondering, if people stepped out, I'd speak to them. Well, there was this gal on my block about 6 houses down. Her name was Norma. And Norma was older, so kind. She had lost her husband. So she is in that home by herself. And she came out and she waved at me, almost afraid to leave, the inside of her door frames. And she said, Barbara, oh, hi, how are you doing? And Norma, I'm doing great. How are you doing? And Norma says, oh, Barbara, this is so hard. And I said, what, Norma? I can't see anybody. I mean, I'm just staying here. I'm trying to do what I'm supposed to, but it's so hard. I just don't know, how to just do this by myself. And I could see she was struggling. She's on the verge of tears and, trying to decide if these were the last days of her life, do you want to live it alone? And I just looked at her and go like this. I said, Norma, just get out, go. Like, what are you doing? Look at what you're doing to yourself. And that was my frustration because I kept seeing that people thinking that they had no choice but to, buckle down and be by themselves, lonely, sad, discouraged. That was hard. And I told her, get out. And she looked at me and she said, really? I said, yes, Norma, get out, go, forget what you're being told. Don't live these last days or whatever they may be by yourself. And then I also counter that with what was happening in the fall of 2020. I started holding meetings for parents as we were getting ready in our school district to go back to school. And there had been a plan to go hybrid. And our parents wanted our kids back in school. They had already done the spring thing and it did not work. It was not working. The kids wanted to go back. I was rallying with the kids, having meetings at our place with the parents, and it got so big that we were having meetings, in a larger place. And, for those of you who know, at that point, many sports were being canceled. And with Doug Swanson's help and his yes to all sports, which helped get sports back open up north because the kids needed something to do, right? They needed something to look forward to. And as we were working through all of this and it was having these conversations, the parents were telling me they would have probably taken their kids out of school if they thought they could have homeschooled, but still have them engage in these activities, any of the Idaho high school activities, from the sports to the band, to the choir, the things that brought joy to their lives and gave them value and meaning. And so what was hard on the kids, I was having moms tell me of their 4.2 children, grade average, that were excellent students, and yet they were experiencing untold, and athletes, big time athletes with D1 scholarships, and yet they were experiencing incredible anxiety. And they're experiencing anxiety because the counselor, and they all knew what would happen. It was happening in more than just our schools, and they'd call their name, and they were worried their name was going to be called, and they'd have to go see the counselor, where then the counselor would tell them, listen, you've been exposed to someone who's been tested with COVID. And so we're going to, and the person tested with COVID wasn't sick, and it was another student. And so they were then sending them home to quarantine for 2 weeks. And as one of the mothers said, hey, my son can do XYZ. He can't, or she can't, they can't teach themselves calculus, because that's what they're doing. We didn't have cameras in the classroom. They were having to teach themselves school, and they can't all teach themselves calculus, no matter how smart these kids were. And so they'd get sent home for 2 weeks. And we had a kid, more than one, but a kid at Skyline who, from a tough family, and his whole world revolved around football. So he got sent home, couldn't do football for 2 weeks, came back. Finally, he's back at school, going to do football. And a day later, same thing, called to the office. You were exposed to somebody who had tested positive for COVID, though they're not sick. You got to go home again. He had to go home again. This kid's life, his whole world, and his support staff was his team and his coaches. And he sent home to Flonder by himself for a month. And this is this is part of one of the things that really frustrated me. So with one of our trustees, the trustee had wanted to speak with our state epidemiologist, Dr. Hahn. And he'd been trying, he called me and he said, I can't get a hold of her. I said, no problem. Well, I made arrangements. We spoke with Dr. Christine Hahn. And as we were having that conversation, finally after about 40 minutes, I had something I had to go do. And I said, Dr. Hahn, I need to ask you a question. So according to whatever our standards are right now, if you're in a classroom and you're within 6 feet of someone for 15 minutes, and that person supposedly tested positive for COVID, then anybody within 6 feet for 15 minutes, they now have to go home. Am I understanding that right? Yes, Representative. She said, yes, you are. And I said, okay, good. Well, then Dr. Hahn, what we're telling our students, what I'm telling our parents now, is to set their watches. And they're probably going to have to do watches if they can't have phones now. But I think I actually said phones. To set their phones for every 12 minutes. And every 12 minutes, I'm going to tell the kids to get up and move. Move from where you were sitting. And Dr. Hahn said, wait. Well, now, no. That's just an arbitrary number. And I said, Dr. Hahn, then what is it? 10 minutes? We'll have them move every 10 minutes, but we have to do something for our kids because they are tired, they're anxious, they are scared that they're going to be sent home, and that's not what they want. They need to be here at school, and they want to be here at school. And I'm just sharing these things with this committee because this was a huge, huge frustration of mine, because I worked directly. I was the only elected official working directly with our parents during that whole time, fighting to help keep our kids in school. And so it is with this idea of this statewide quarantine really perpetrated upon us, which is why I am glad that we've been making motions on the state of Idaho, really perpetrated upon us from health and welfare and others with information and misinformation. And granted, I know there were things we didn't know, but for heaven's sakes, we're talking about our kids, and the kids weren't getting sick. So anyway, committee, these are just some of my frustrations that I felt. I'll try not to say something with everything, but this was something I felt like I really had to share. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Just a quick comment from the chair. In a different life, I was responsible for making a lot of decisions for a great number of people, some of which involved moral decisions, financial, some even life and death. And I salute our state leaders for having taken us through COVID. Their task was not easy. Trust me, I know. And when challenged with difficult decision-making, I always referred back, aside from the moral directives that I try to follow, the highest law of the land. As a decision maker, that was a guiding light, something I couldn't begin to equivocate with or modify or challenge or reinterpret. It says what it says. It is what it is. The constitutions of the United States of America and the state of Idaho are sacred. They're chiseled in stone. No one, except by the will of the people and action of the legislature, can change the state constitution. Again, I'm not faulting anybody. They did what they thought was right. Their intentions, I'm certain. I know those folks, they're good people. But they did violate the federal and state constitution. And in my opinion, it's just my opinion as a member of the committee, that is something that you just never do. You don't have the authority, moral, legal, or constitutional, to tamper in that area, even with the best of intentions. So I salute them on the one hand for getting us through COVID, but I think a better solution would have been to disseminate all the reliable information at their disposal and let Idahoans make up their own minds as to how to proceed. I've visited or lived in every state in this union, and I can tell you that Idahoans don't need the government to interpret life decisions for them. They're smart, God-fearing, decent, educated people. And I think if we had left them to their own devices, they would have figured things out for themselves and we would have been just fine. Granted, hindsight's 20/20, but one thing is cut in stone, and that is the Constitution is something that can never be violated. Once you take the first step down that road, what's the second step and the third and the fourth? It's an emergency. It's war. It's this. It's an economic catastrophe, whatever. The Constitution there acts as a limiting document on the power of government. That's what it is, a limiting document. And during times of emergency, we need to rely on government respecting, absolutely respecting both constitutions, then more than ever. So reluctantly, I have to state that I think there were violations of constitutional rights. Any further debate? Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I so appreciate the comments that everybody has provided. I think it just speaks to the difficulty that it must have been during this time to make these type of decisions that impact lives. I agree wholeheartedly about the importance of the Constitution. I've taken an oath to uphold it, not just as a representative, but also now as an attorney. So I just want to speak a little bit about my interpretation here. I do think that violations of the Constitution are very serious, but I also think that we need to talk a little bit about the 10th Amendment, because I think that that's what this question is actually asking is, was there a permissible reason to exercise police power? And in my analysis, all that we need to show here is that the state had a substantial government interest. And again, we're talking about March 25th of 2020. And I don't know that there's a court that wouldn't find that there was a substantial interest at that time. So for me, this was a clearly permissible exercise of the police power of the state. So for me, this one is a no.
Thank you, Representative. Any further comments, discussion, debate? Seeing none, the chair will entertain any motion that the committee may have. Representative Redmond,
For a motion,
motion's in order.
I would move that the state of Idaho did violate the U.S. and state constitution with a statewide quarantine mandate.
Thank you. Do we have a second to the motion?
Second.
Second from Representative Ehart. Committee, any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, seeing none. If our secretary would be kind enough to please restate the motion so everyone's clear on it, and then begin a roll call vote.
Motion made by Representative Redmond. The state of Idaho did violate U.S. and state constitutional rights with a statewide quarantine. Senator Foreman,
Aye.
Representative Ehart,
Yes.
Senator Van Orden,
Aye.
Representative Redmond,
Yes.
Senator Bierke, Representative Schertz,
Yeah.
Senator Carlson, Representative Beiswinger, Senator Taylor, Representative Eggert. Roll shows 8 in favor, 2 against.
Thank you. Final report will so reflect. Moving on to agenda item D as in David. The question is, did the governors and the executive branches in the state of Idaho's continuance of the declared state of extreme emergency beyond 90 days violate state code? And for clarification, the chair will add that there was some question about how long the state of extreme emergency lasted. Upon further review, it appears that the state of extreme emergency, by the calendar, the way I see it, and you all have the timelines and the data in front of you, it appears that the declared state of extreme emergency did not extend beyond 90 days, but that's my take on it. What does the committee have to say? Senator Taylor.
Mr. Chairman, let's put this in the calendar as probably a first for a while. I came to that same conclusion with you.
Yeah. I'm looking for the dates here. On 25 March 2020, the governor declared a state of extreme emergency. And then on 11 June 2020, he ended the declared state of extreme emergency. But he reaffirmed a state of emergency, which is different. So the chair will entertain any discussion or debate on this particular question. Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion to deal with this question. Representative Redmond,
For a motion,
motion is in order.
the state of Idaho did not violate state code by declaring a state of emergency beyond 90 days.
Thank you. Do we have a second to that motion? And we have a second from Senator Bierke.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Taylor.
just for clarification, this is for extreme emergency, not state of
Yes,
emergency.
extreme emergency only. Thank you. Committee, we have a motion and it's been seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, if Secretary would please reread the motion and then begin a roll call vote.
The motion made by Representative Redmond. The state of Idaho did not violate state code by its declaration of an extreme emergency. Senator Foreman,
Aye.
Representative Ehart,
Yes.
Senator Van Orden. Representative Redmond,
Yes.
Senator Bierke. Representative Schertz,
Aye.
Senator Carlson. Representative Beiswinger.
Yes.
Senator Taylor. Representative Egbert. All in favor.
Thank you. And the final report will so reflect. Moving on to item E is in echo. Question is, did the establishment by the governor, the executive branch, and the state of Idaho of the Coronavirus Financial Advisory Committee, otherwise known by the acronym CFAC, to partly manage federal COVID funding violate state code and/or the state constitution? The chair will now entertain discussion on that question. Chair can start off here. I'm looking at my notes and let me find it. Okay, I have it now. The issue of non-cognizable funds comes into play here, and those are funds, they're non-state funds obtained after appropriations are established and from which expenditures must be made prior to the next legislative session. Use of those funds must be approved by DFM. Article 2, Section 1 of the Idaho Constitution declares the powers of state government are divided into 3 distinct departments. We all know what they are: executive, legislative, and judicial. And no department may exercise the powers rightly belonging to another department. Article 3, Section 1 of the Idaho Constitution states the legislature has the power to make law and declare public policy. Court rulings have made it clear the legislature has absolute control over the finances of the state. Nothing in the Idaho Constitution gives the governor or the executive branch the authority to determine how to distribute federal funds allocated to the state of Idaho. This decision is a policy decision, should be made by the legislature if not made by the federal government. Government implements fiscal policy, but he does not make the policy. We all know what the procedures are along those lines. Now, the governor treated the COVID relief funds, the CRF funds, it's 1.25 million, as non-cognizable funds under Idaho Code 67-3516 sub 2, which would allow agencies to spend the funding. However, under that same code, the federal funding would have to be made available to a specific agency of state government to be treated as non-cognizable funds. Idaho Code 67-3516 sub 2 does not give the governor or the CFAC authority to distribute CRF monies. Distributing those monies involve making policy decisions that belong to the legislature. My opinion, for what it's worth. Committee, what are your opinions on this question? Senator Van Orden.
Mr. Chairman, in reading through one of the documents that you had sent to us, it was an opinion by, I believe,
Francis.
Elizabeth Bowen, Legislative
Bowen,
Legal
okay.
Counsel. She does talk in here about how these funds could have flown or flowed to be able to give the governor powers to do this, but those steps were not, in my opinion, in reading this, these steps were not followed. It says here that the governor could have ordered the transfer of monies from the general fund dedicated funds to a disaster emergency account and then been able to disperse them at that point. And that step, I believe in here was, as I read this, was not taken. So the governor did set up a committee and move it forward, but those monies, it's my understanding from this, did not flow to that account and then come back out of there. Is that correct?
Senator, thank you. Yes, that's my understanding as well. If anybody would like further clarification, we do have Francis Lippett here, who you didn't think you were going to get off the hook, did you? But would you care to speak to that at all? Because I think it's a seminal point, because it does focus in on how the monies were handled. Thank you.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. So again, just to reiterate your point about non-cognizable funding, that statute applies to funds that are available to a particular agency. And so the more straightforward way of dealing with the coronavirus relief funds that were made available to the entire state would be to set them aside for reimbursements from that disaster recovery fund. And so in that way, the non-cognizable funding would, it would avoid that that challenge with the statute.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any further comments, questions on this point? Representative Ehart?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will just state that during this time, as you know, the representatives of the people, again, I think I was the only one here during this time, that we were very eager and willing to have come and participated in that.
Thank you, Representative. You know, there was a lot of reference material here. I've gone through it, combed through it numerous times. Again, my compliments to the LSO for providing all of that. I recognize this was a one-off sort of situation. It's not something that the legislature or the executive branch deals with on a regular basis. I don't know if we've ever dealt with anything quite like that. But again, I'm a procedural person, maybe to a fault, maybe not, I don't know. But if we have procedures in place, I was always told, like I said in my previous life, that if you deviate from the published rule, you darn well better have a good reason why. You need to explain the exigent circumstance that justified deviating from something that was already planned out, written into code, into law, and there as a roadmap for future actions of all parties involved. Why did you deviate? I'm sure that this deviation, and I do think it's a deviation from code, was done in good faith to try to deal with this major influx of money. We're talking 1.25 here. That's a lot. It was just a small slice of the overall COVID that came in many different pots, but still, it's a lot of money. So I think the actions did technically deviate from Idaho code. The money was earmarked for the state of Idaho, not an agency, and therefore it should have followed a different process of handling. And so my conclusion is there was technically a code violation there, but Representative Beismeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just kind of want to say maybe like in situations like these was maybe a little bit frustrating sitting here as I go, well, why wasn't the legislature called into session? It wasn't such an emergency that they couldn't get together even for a week to maybe the governor or whoever could have asked for some additional leeway or authority that could have been written into code, could have written into the procedures that say, given the circumstance for, 6 months or the rest of the year, you can do things like this, which we normally wouldn't allow. And just seems like that step was bypassed too.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. Any further discussion? Senator Van Orden?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what we had going on at the time too was what would have been the protocols that would have had to be taken during this time also to protect not only the legislators coming in for a special session, but also staff that were here too. So I think that was kind of a stumbling block that was in the way also. But I guess as I read through this question, we talk about, did the establishment by the governor or the Coronavirus Financial Advisory Committee to partly manage federal COVID funding? So what is partly manage? Part of the money or part of the?
Yeah,
rules?
Thank you, Senator. It's a good question. Since I wrote this agenda, I can answer that. I meant that to mean that there were other COVID funds. What was it, 20 point something billion that came in total, something like that. And this was dealing with 1.25 billion of that. So I just wanted to make it clear that not all the COVID funds were treated in this manner. It was just the CRF portion.
Thank you. So it was a portion of it. Thank you.
Committee, Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for a clarification, are we asking that it was the establishment of the CFAC that broke the code or didn't adhere to the code, or was it the results that the CFAC came up with and how the money was allocated?
Yeah, well, thank you, Senator. Having written the question, my intent behind the question was to ask whether handling the money by the CFAC was a violation, not just the creation of the body, but the creation combined with the actions taken in respect to how they dealt with the money is what we're questioning. But good clarification, thank you. Anything else, committee? Senator Bjorky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I find it a little bit difficult not having been here when this was happening, because I'm kind of a get to the motive kind of person, and I would have liked to have been in that back room that these discussions were taking place. But I can't help but realize that without reading into something, that just having the legislator reconvene and be called back probably would have been a good idea, not just for how this money would be directed, but for everything else that was going on during that time. It would have been good to have the representatives of the people we represent, having their voice heard at that time. So although it's a technicality, and I don't like to be a Monday morning quarterback, I wasn't here, but we're supposed to be looking at this, like I said, technical aspects and clinical, and how this happened. And so my vote will be yes.
Thank you, Senator. It brings up a good point. I've been asked by a number of people, well, why is the legislature even doing this? COVID's over, COVID's done. What, 5 years ago it started or something like that? Yeah. And my response is, one of the seminal taskings, responsibilities of the legislature is to, like Senator Bjorky just said, act as representatives of the people. If we don't do this, no one else will. No one else is tasked to do it. No one else probably should be doing it. And legislatures in the various states and at the US level, US Congress, they investigate and report and make decisions on things every single day. COVID was monumental. And I think it is absolutely fitting, Senator, I agree with you that this body is here as representatives of the people to be fair and impartial and take a look at least a little slice of what happened during COVID. It is an appropriate tasking for the Idaho legislature. And I'm proud of the fact that Idaho, to my knowledge, is the only state doing this. That doesn't surprise me. Idaho leads the pack on just about everything. And that's not brag, that's fact. So I'm proud to be here. I think it's a fitting purpose. And I do agree that the representatives of the people maybe should have been involved to a greater degree, not just on this particular issue, but on the broad base of COVID. Maybe in hindsight, that would have been a little bit better, but I don't want to get too far off point. Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Truly a more crafted thought in regards to this. In some ways, as you try to understand what was happening, I absolutely agree. We felt we were under an emergency situation, and no doubt this was to try to address that emergency. But at the very least, an advisory committee was formed at the very least to do what our legislative council could have done. If there had been initial concerns about having the entire legislative body return, with staff and everything, at the very least, then our legislative council should have come back. That is one of the duties for which they are tasked, and essentially to act on our behalf until maybe at such time we should act on our own behalf. And so this is probably one where, feel like, yeah, we probably did go sideways because the people in that committee, no doubt with huge, fantastic intentions, just simply, again, weren't representatives of the people. And so many of the people by this time were crying out for their representatives to be here and be representing them. So it is for that reason, depending on I'm assuming my colleague to my left will be making a motion, that I will be supporting the premise of this.
Thank you, Representative. Any further discussion? Seeing none, the chair will entertain any motions the committee may have on this question. Representative Redmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been designated the motion maker apparently. So I would move the state of Idaho did violate Idaho code in the management of some of the federal COVID funding through CFAT.
Thank you. Do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
Thank you. Senator Van Orden seconds. Committee, chair will entertain any discussion on the motion. Hearing none, if our secretary would kindly repeat the motion for the edification of the committee and then commence a roll call vote.
Motion made by Representative Redmond and seconded by Senator Van Orden. The state of Idaho did violate state code by the creation of the Coronis Financial Advisory Committee and managing some federal funding. Senator Foreman.
Aye.
Representative Ehart.
Yes.
Senator Van Orden.
Aye.
Representative Redmond.
Yes.
Senator Bierke. Representative Schertz.
Yes.
Thank you. Senator Carlson. Representative Beiswinger.
Yes.
Senator Taylor. Representative Egbert. All in favors.
Thank you. And that will be reflected in the final report as well as the minutes. Moving on to the last published specific agenda item under F as in Frank. Did the governors and the executive branches in the state of Idaho's extension of the state of emergency beyond 60 days violate state code? And the chair would like to point out that this one is to me, quite interesting, because I'm sure the lawyers in the room and Representative Schertz electronically know that if you present a statute to 25 people in a room, you know where I'm going with this, you'll get 25 different impressions as to exactly what that statute means. Having done a short stint at law school, I was in a class where they did just that. I think there were 15 of us. We had 15 different opinions for the same words on paper. What did it really mean? What was the intent? You get lots of, well, I think, well, maybe they meant this, maybe they meant that. So I think this is one of these situations. And I think Elizabeth Bowen, who did a very nice legal workup for us, pretty much stated that in her report. I have my opinion as to what the code means. It kind of hinges on the word however. I think the code was violated, but I'm sure there's going to be more than one opinion on this. So if you're ready, now's the time to voice your expressions on what you think about this question, committee. Chair will entertain discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Taylor.
I'll take the opportunity to go first this time.
Okay.
You know, I think Elizabeth Bowman did a great job at explaining this. And I think that there's a little bit of vagueness on that statute 46-1008, because it doesn't necessarily enumerate how many times the governor can declare a 30-day emergency. It's written in there twice, but it doesn't say he can only do it twice. So it leaves it wide open for interpretation. One of 10 here probably in this group. So that's how I see that. I think this is one of those ones that probably should be revisited and maybe tightened up a little bit in the future.
Thank you, Senator. Any further comments? Well, seeing none. I agree. The code maybe needs a little work there so that we don't wrestle with this in the future. For me, the way it was structured, it said the governor, and I'm paraphrasing, can basically deal with the emergency, do what he needs to do. But then it gets to that troublesome word, however. So you have to kind of put yourself in the author's shoes. Who wrote that? What was he or she thinking? To me, the use of the word however modifies everything that came in front of it, to the sense that, yes, you can extend this emergency, you can go out X number of days, do what you need to do. However, it won't exceed 30 days and then one 30-day renewal. So I'm going to come down on the side of it did technically violate the code. I think if they put however, it will not go beyond. I think they meant it to not go beyond without maybe legislative participation, for lack of a better word. So it's my opinion, just my opinion, that yes, there was a violation there, but it's up to what everybody else thinks collectively, corporately here. So Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is one that I've spent more time on and have had discussions with colleagues, both currently serving and formerly serving. And if there's this term, spirit of the law and letter of the law, and I would say the spirit of the law certainly was violated, but I don't, because of how this was written, I don't know if the letter of the law was violated. And through the spirit of the law, eventually we brought legislation to stop this. But as I had shared with our good chairman, that one of the things that I wanted to do and to add to the discussion was the emergency powers as a whole, which the good senator down there has referenced, and something that I think is something that we, maybe it's through another task force, do need to take a look at. So this is actually, I'd be curious with any of my colleagues and weighing in on this. I'm not sure that I believe on the letter of the law that this was violated, but I certainly believe the spirit of the law, it was violated.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Pierke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I looked at the what our legal counsel, Ms. Bowens, had provided, and I kind of look at it also under the lens of, we're looking at COVID-19 and the disaster that it was in many respects, but we're not taking into account, at least from my perspective, a potential future emergency that is truly something that goes on for maybe 6 months, that is like a super legitimate thing that everybody in the state is just, so that's kind of the lens I looked at this. It's almost to the point where I would almost not want to continue moving forward with a motion or even addressing this. It's not my choice, but just I'm so stuck in the middle on it. Letter of the law, spirit of the law, and all that. That I just, would like to address it further, maybe at some other point. That's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Senator. Any further? No. Senator Van Orden, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just echoing the statements that have already been made. I feel like you're correct in assuming that this probably should be addressed in the future and tightened up. But at this point, I could not say that the letter of the law was violated.
Thank you, Senator. Any further? Representative, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this one is obviously one of those squishy ones for me as well. And I very much appreciate the legal opinion that just said that it's squishy in legal terms. But I think for me, I just have a hard time believing that the legislative intent here was to put a numbered day limit on an emergency. I think that I tend to agree with the legal opinion that the more reasonable explanation is that it could have been continued if necessary. So I agree that I'm glad we looked at this so that maybe we can address it in the future and clarify. But for me, I would have a hard time saying yes to this one with how much ambiguity exists.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Redmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, hearing the concerns of the committee, I do think this is something that should be addressed next session, and that's probably a good, some good homework for this committee to look at addressing. But I would like to make a motion.
Motion is in order.
I would make a motion to actually table question F on the agenda, just because of the I think ambiguity in the code and knowing that we are going to take it up.
Do we have a second to the motion? Second from Senator Bierke. Any further motions? Any substitutes? Anything at all? Okay, the chair will entertain discussion on the motion. Hearing none, if the secretary would please restate it and then begin our roll call vote.
Motion made by Representative Redmond and seconded by Senator Bierke is to table question F on the October 1 agenda. Senator Foreman.
Aye.
Representative Ehart.
Yes.
Senator Van Orden.
Aye.
Representative Redmond.
Yes.
Senator Bierke.
Aye.
Representative Schertz.
You lose him?
Aye.
Thank you.
Sorry, guys.
Senator Carlson. Representative Beiswanger. Senator Taylor. Representative Egbert. All in favor.
Thank you. And it will be so reflected in the final report and the minutes. Representative Ehart, did you wish to say a few words about the emergency powers situation and legislation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, committee, as I stated in the beginning, and as has been referenced a couple of times, the good chairman and myself had numerous conversations, and they lasted 90 minutes to a couple of hours at times concerning this. And certainly one of the things, although it helped to read his SCR 102 to get back on track, but one of the concerns that I'd like to bring up now, even if only discussed, for a little bit, and that is, having gone through this during COVID, we in the 2021 session, and actually the 2020 special session, really started looking at, oh my goodness, what are these emergency powers? And if you go to Title 46 and you start looking through pages and pages of emergency powers, you see, and I think a lot of this is true for other states, because a lot of what our constitutions have, you will see are similar. We kind of pick and choose and steal from each other, and that's completely fine. But as we read through these emergency powers, we're at a level, I don't think everybody knows what's in here, but this is more like a war, like China came and dropped a nuclear bomb and invaded Idaho. Because in some of these emergency powers here, I don't know if you know, but they can, it allows the government to, for example, come take over your home, take over your lands, close your roads, just because we'd be talking truly more war, in my opinion, understanding, and that of others far more intelligent than myself, we'd be looking at wartime sort of emergency powers. And so I think I would love to have this committee, even if it's just a short conversation, possibly with the suggestion of task force, maybe the same one after this, continuing on and looking in, not just with the 60 days, but more of what the emergency powers mean, even if we gave it a level 1, 2, 3, because these emergency powers here would not apply, in my opinion, for the most part, should not apply to something such as COVID. So I think it would behoove us. I think people would be shocked to see some of what's in our, statutes. And again, put there, no doubt, for extreme, circumstances that, just would probably be on our wildest imagination. So with that, then I would like to, where you have allowed us to bring up other parts of discussion, I would like to move that this committee take up and have a discussion on the emergency powers and what this committee might suggest, probably more for the future in regards to maybe re-examining them.
Thank you, Representative. I think the best way to go with this is I'm certainly okay as chairman with having a discussion now. I think necessarily it wouldn't touch on all the nitty-gritty details. It would have to be somewhat brief.
Right.
But I think the more formal procedure down the road would be for a resolution to be drafted, kind of to follow in the footprints of SCR 102, go through that process and have both bodies of the legislature vote on it and empower a committee or a task force to officially look into the issue. But we are only at 11 o'clock. We've got some time here. I'm perfectly amenable, if everybody else is, to entering into a short discussion on that topic.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I might take a co-chair privilege, might I suggest that we take a break for 10 to 15 minutes, please, and then come back and take up this particular point of conversation? Second.
I think I can make an executive decision here. I don't think we need to have you waste any more pencil lead with a vote. Let's take a 15-minute break, and we'll be in recess for 15 minutes.
All right, you have been watching the COVID-19 Response Study Committee, the day one of this 3-day committee meeting. Thank you for tuning in and leaving your comments. This has been definitely a fascinating, if not sometimes frustrating, hearing to watch and to view. They're going to take a 15-minute break. We don't have any clips ready at the moment, but there definitely were some moments during the first 2 hours of this committee, particularly near the end, where Senator Foreman became a little bit more candid on why this committee is existing to begin with. I don't know about you folks, but I have not seen any government agency do this level of analysis, at least, and I'm talking about statewide agencies, this level of analysis of what occurred in Idaho during COVID, this sort of investigation, if you will. And it really is an investigation because they are looking for the instances where our constitutional rights were violated by government, and by government, by people in government, government agencies, from the executive branch all the way down to the school boards and what other county commissioners or city councils. Right now, they made it clear at the top that they weren't going to be necessarily calling people out and assessing blame, specific blame. I would love to kind of see that in a phase 2, but there is a very cordial civil conversation happening. There's 2 Democrats on the committee. All of the Republicans seem to be in agreement. You'll see a few, like Senator Julie Van Orden early on was kind of questioning whether she agreed with some of the questions and the resolution or the answers to the questions, and we'll go over those to kind of refresh you. But there was definitely a sense of apprehension on her part on whether or not she should go along with with the answers that were being given. And then, of course, the 2 Democrats seem to just be there defending the government, as Democrats are wont to do. Government can do no wrong. Although there were a few votes that did happen unanimously, and we think that's pretty good. There was a there was a moment here, though, that I wanted to reflect upon, and we'll clip it out and share it, where, to go back to my earlier point, that Senator Foreman was talking about how there's no other committee, there's no other agency, there's no other group out there who has said, hey, what did Idaho do? What were the restrictions? Where did they come from? And did they violate the Constitution? Because I think after these 3 days here, they're going to issue a report with their findings. And I think that, to me, will be our ammunition in order to hold people accountable, because that's what it really comes down to. Representative Ehart at one moment was talking about how I think she said there was a park that she lived across the street from or worked across the street from, a kid's park with a playground set and everything. And that it was all roped off. It was all quarantined off and no one could go to the park. Kids could not go play in the park. And I recall seeing that in my, in my area. And I recall seeing pictures across the country of, playgrounds quarantined off and kids are not allowed to go play on the structures and such. And we could beat that question to death as to why were they doing it? It was so stupid to be doing that in the first place. But at the end of the day, what I'm more interested in is who ordered that, who was told to do that, who made the decision that said we had to rope off the playground. We keep using this term, government did that. But government is made up of people. It's made up of you and me. And we need to be asking the question, who was it that said, we are going to rope it off? We're going to institute these restrictions. We are going to make this real for people. That they have to wear a mask if their kid goes to school. That you can't enter the city. You can't enter city limits without wearing a mask. And sadly, here in Idaho, the people who made those decisions, some of them are still in power. Some of them were re-voted in. And so while we can sit here and say we didn't like that, or that those were dumb decisions, we turn around and reward them. We reward these people. And I'm specifically thinking of Coeur d'Alene up in North Idaho, Kootenai County, that had those traffic signs standing on the road that said masks required in Coeur d'Alene, and they were right outside city limits. Who did that? Whose decision was it? And why were they rewarded with being reelected? Or why are they being rewarded with maintaining their job? These are not the people that you need in job. They're violating your rights. And so now we have this study. Now we're going to have these things. And look, some of you may out there maybe, this is ridiculous. This is a waste of time. Just don't comply. Just don't do it. Well, I'm sorry, but you are a rare breed. Okay. You are a rare breed. There's more of you now. Yes. But you are a rare breed. And how do I know that? Because the entire world fell under this spell. I commend Senator Carl Bjerke for calling out that this was a global event. These restrictions went global. So now is the time for accountability. And sure, it's 5 years later, and those who would be held accountable for their horrible actions, they're the ones who are saying, why are we talking about this? Why don't we we've moved on. Well, of course we want to move on. They want us to forget, but we're not going to forget. We're not going to forget. And that's why we think it's really important to keep this at the forefront, to have this study commission. We commend all the folks on the committee who showed up to have this. And I really do appreciate it. All right, let's see here. There was the questions that were on the agenda. The first question, if I can go over to the agenda here, the first question was, did the closing of houses of worship by the governor violate state code and or the U.S. or state constitutions? The committee voted, is it a 10-person committee? Is it 8-2? I think that's what it was. It's a 10-person committee, and the committee voted 8-2 that yes, the Constitution was violated by the order to close houses of worship. And it was interesting, the Democrats. This is the first question where Senator Van Orden wasn't quite on board yet. Because the Democrats were also making the argument that you still were free to practice your religion. No one said you can't practice your religion. They just said you couldn't do it in your church. And Representative Redmond certainly came out and said, well, if practicing my religion means that I get to gather with fellow believers at our church, that's how I practice my religion. And you're telling me I can't do that. You've certainly violated the Constitution. And the Democrats didn't buy that argument one bit, and so they ended up voting 8-2 with that. But of course, we had the First Amendment scrolling on the bottom there, and it expressly says, the Congress shall make no law establishing a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And so that was a clear violation of the Constitution. That went 8-2. The next question they had was a similar one, but this had to deal with the closing of businesses. Did that violate the state constitution? There were some arguments on that. The Democrats went harder in the paint because they said that there's no constitutional, section, like for instance in the First Amendment, that dealt with specifically businesses. But it was pointed out that the Fifth Amendment also protects you from the government taking away any of your belongings or your property or your ability to be compensated for your property, and that's what happened when the government shut down the businesses. So that one I think also passed along party lines 8-2, or maybe it was 1. Maybe it was 9-1. I think Senator Taylor joined the other side with that. The third one was, did the governor's order of a statewide quarantine violate state code and or the U.S. Constitution? And of course, Representative Beiswinger just hit it out of the park when he said, a quarantine typically, most people think of a quarantine as when you quarantine the sick, when you quarantine a sick person. And you say, hey, you have, a highly communicable disease. You need to stay in your house. You need to stay in the hospital. You need to stay there. Otherwise, you are a danger. You are a danger to society by walking around with this highly communicable, deadly disease or such. And he said what they did was the opposite. It was saying, all you healthy people, you have to stay inside. You can't go outside. So a clear violation, calling it false imprisonment. So we'd love to see that phrase "false imprisonment" put into the study as it's released, because I think that may have some ramifications, depending, of course, upon the what do they call it? The statute of limitations, right? Because I'm wondering, folks, I'm wondering, we get this study, it comes out, it says, yes, there were violations done. Which in my opinion should launch an investigation, like a law enforcement investigation. I mean, the Attorney General should take this study and then say, all right, well, who in the state violated the Constitution? Because there seems to be this idea that you can just violate the Constitution and either keep your job or get reelected. And if that is the supreme law of our land, both federally and in state, what is the penalty for violating the Constitution? Is it a class action lawsuit of the people of Idaho to the government? Is it identifying a specific person and suing them in civil court? I really don't know what the next phase is, but I'm hoping there will be one. One of the things that I'm also hoping for, as the committee looks to be getting back into their chairs here, is a formal apology. There needs to be that. All right, we'll continue to wrap up after the committee. It looks like their break is just about over. Everybody's settled back in. I don't know if they have a timer on their end and they're going to take the full 15 minutes, but we have been going here for about 15. Again, on the panel here, the two Democrats are on the far tips of the dais. Senator Taylor on your left, Representative Egbert on your right, and going from right to left, Representative Rob Beiswinger, Jordan Redmond, Barbara Ehart, Senator Dan Foreman. Okay, we're back.
Committee is in order. We have our quorum back, and Representative Ehart is going to address the issue of the code, I believe, with respect to emergency powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So committee, if you were to go to Title 46, our emergency powers are, I say generally, I'm sure there's something somewhere else, but generally held within Title 46. And if there's a heck of a lot here, I wasn't planning to go in and put a heck of a lot of work into this, because my main point of discussion that I was hoping on these extra agenda items would be more of a quick discussion to see what your thoughts might be on a potential part of our report back would be the suggestion from the committee that we also, either through a resolution like an HCR 1 or whatever it might be, look to continue this committee in looking into the emergency powers and how both questions that have been raised with the 60 days, finding, clarification, and some of the other powers and when they, should be enacted. Again, I think a lot of people, even in the state of Idaho, let alone us, because I know I certainly was, along with my colleagues in 2020, were just absolutely surprised to read, as you got into this, what the emergency powers entailed. And then the question, which I think would be worth helping to answer, for what purpose and when really should these emergency powers be able to be used? Because, for example, again, something like COVID, it just certainly, one might say, well, there is no need for it, but that's not the purpose for the emergency powers as I'm interpreting them by reading them. So, but the interpretation Barbara Ehart uses may not be the interpretation that others would be so inclined to use. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would be curious if any of our colleagues might also be interested in including in the report, entertaining, the continuation of this at another time, again, possibly through resolution to look into the emergency powers.
Thank you, Representative. Committee, your thoughts on Representative Ehart's comments? Senator Bierke, I believe, was first in line.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you start looking at the emergency powers. There's a lot of changes that came about in the federal government that kind of trickled down to states, counties, and cities through the Stafford Act and the Patriot Act, some of the stuff that happened after 9/11. And it opens up a little bit of a can of worms, because up to COVID, we just took that at carte blanche. Hey, this is great stuff. We're addressing the needs for emergency management in cities and counties and states. We all have our emergency plans. And from those emergency plans, we get into kind of what the powers are for governors when it comes to emergencies. We looked at the one, we had some consternation over at least some different things, different opinion on the 30-day deal. And, maybe we offer up that anytime it's going to extend beyond that first 30 days, that's an automatic call for the legislator to come back instead of having to have that 60% and us calling us back ourselves. But it's kind of a complicated issue, but I know that my constituents are always very concerned when votes come up for adoption of county plans, or, because they see all these things that can be done that kind of like trample on the rights of the individual. Where in the past we've just said, hey, well, we got to have all that because we got to make sure everything is taken care of, and we got to let FEMA do this and this and that. But I think it's worthy, and that's just my point, that it's probably worthy of kind of looking at from the top down and the ground up to make sure that those emergency powers reflect what we really want our government here in Idaho to do. And that would also trickle down to maybe some state plans, county and city plans that limit some of those powers that would take away our liberties. And that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Van Orden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm looking at Title 46, Representative Ehart, militia and military affairs. I mean, I guess if we did a committee, you would pick specific ones out of here, correct? Because it's pretty broad, this Title 46. So, I mean, just in general, are you looking at certain ones?
Representative.
Mr. Chairman, good Senator, I believe we'd need to look at certain ones, and I am so sorry that I was ill-prepared. There's so much to it. I'd say 4 years ago, I could tell you where they were, but this idea again of the fact that when and why under emergency orders really should anyone be able to come and have to quarter in your home? That just seems so foreign, literally. And so it would be, I think it'd be taking it and looking at it through those lens as to where we are. Should they be able to maybe possibly close your road off because of disaster, things like that? Absolutely. But, we still have some things that are concerning to me, including the 60 days. So it would definitely, some things would not be pertaining to us, with some of the military, but other things do. And might I just add one other thing that I wish that I said on the floor during 2021 and 2022 multiple times, that the question with this, as you can see, this did not come about with our current governor and had, in my mind, zero to do with our current governor. We have no idea what kind of governor we may have in the future. I believe, again, that, there are so many things our governor did right, but we don't know what a governor may do in the future. So to kind of roll things back during a time of non-emergency, or at least look at things during a time of non-emergency without that pressure, I think might be wise from a committee standpoint.
Follow up?
I believe some of it maybe is outdated. Are we correct? Maybe some of it was from times past that needed to be updated into what we're facing now, correct?
I think so, having read it myself numerous times. But that's the way code is, from time to time we have to revise it and bring it up to speed to make sure we understand what it really means, or maybe make it mean what it should mean. Any further? Representative Redmond, you've had your light on. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I completely agree with the colleagues. I do believe that we should look at updating and maybe clarifying some of the current code. I know last year, House Bill 409, which moved out of the House, Representative Price and Senator Taves had worked on, but it was addressing 461008. So that would be a good place, I think, to start, that we could kind of see the work that they did, and it's addressing just that specific section would be a good homework for this group just to check out and look at.
Thank you, Representative. Committee, any further comments on this issue? Representative Ehart, do you think it would be, for impact purposes, best for the committee to formulate a motion, and if approved, include that in the final report, something along the lines that we think this is A, an important issue, B, maybe a House concurrent resolution should be considered? I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth as a chairman, but how best to reflect our thoughts in the final report?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, good committee. My thought would be, given how we had approached today's outline agenda, something similar then to that, which would be more along the lines, and I'll be honest, when this was first called, that was my priority. And again, I appreciate the work of the good chairman here. My first thought was in addressing and reviewing the emergency disaster emergencies and what powers are there. So I think to have a motion that, let's see, and I probably should have had this already written out, but asking essentially for the committee's approval that we continue the work of, I don't know if it has to be this task force, but that a task force be formed to continue looking at the emergency powers and to, basically correct some of the, indecision that we found. But I guess I could just keep it as simple as forming that the committee would agree that a task force needs to continue, separate task force with the work of addressing the emergency powers. And yes, we could do an HCR
Mhm.
102. I'm happy to follow that.
Okay. Do you want to consider that your motion? then, or-
You bet.
Okay.
If Jennifer can decipher that, put it into something
Yeah.
reasonable.
Madam Secretary, do we need any refinement there to make it say what we want it to say? Or are you comfortable with it?
If I may,
Sure, certainly.
the motion made by Representative Ehart is the committee recommends to form a task force to review the emergency powers.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Do we have a second on that motion? Second by Representative Redmond. Committee, any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none? Go ahead, Senator Van Orden.
Good Chairman, both of you, thank you for making this suggestion. As I'm looking under 46, Chapter 6 on martial law and active duty, I look at the date and it's 1927. These need to be very much relooked at and updated, I feel. So thank you for this. I support the motion.
Thank you, Senator. Would the secretary be so kind as to restate the motion and then proceed with a roll call vote, please?
Motion made by Representative Ehart and seconded by Representative Redmond. The committee recommends to form a task force to review the emergency powers. All right. Senator Foreman,
Aye.
Representative Ehart,
Yes.
Senator Van Orden, Representative Redmond,
Yes.
Senator Bierke, Representative Schertz.
Yes.
Thank you. Senator Carlson. Yes. Representative Beiswanger.
Yes.
Senator Taylor. Representative Egbert. All in favor.
Thank you. And the minutes in the final report will reflect the outcome of that vote with the recommendation. We are at the point in the agenda where, in keeping with providing as much flexibility as possible, anybody on the committee who has any concerns or topics that are related to our charter, now is the time. The committee would be more than happy to listen. Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm hoping this is the right spot for this, but you know, my previous life, I dealt with COVID on the front lines, and it was definitely like riding a horse trying to shoot at a jackrabbit that was at full tilt across the prairie. It was very hard to get a beat on what was going on. I think, for starters, I want to thank LSO for all the work that they've done for us on this. It's made things a lot more clear for me. And thanks to the committee for the time that has been put into this. I have some future concerns, though, going forward with some of the key legislative changes that we've made in this last couple of sessions. And we have a very strong emphasis on individual freedoms, which I agree with 100%. And I'm all for government accountability, but I think that some of these legislative changes that we've made, I fear that it might hinder Idaho's ability in the future to maybe implement comprehensive public health measures if we have another pandemic that happens. So I just wanted to put that out there as a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any further comments? Okay, seeing none. I want to talk very briefly about the final report. Co-Chair Ehart and myself will put our heads together and write a fact-based final report, which will be available for the world to see. And each member of the committee needs to know that you can write a minority report. If you disagree with something, if there's 2 or 3 of you that disagree, you can write a minority report so stating, or you can do an individual report where you object in whole or in part to anything that we voted in the affirmative on. So that is certainly your right. And Mr. Slominski will be available, the LSO, to help you with any report writing along those lines. We will not have the need for any further meetings. So it looks like we're able, I know that breaks your heart. And,
I wanted to share something.
and before I give you my closing comments, which will be very brief, Co-Chair Ehart, do you have any closing remarks for these good people?
Mr. Chairman and good committee, no, thank you very much. This was a unique task force, and I appreciate the manner in which all of us tried to handle, especially looking back. And yet sometimes looking back is what gives us the best perspective looking forward. It certainly happens in the scriptures and in other places. So just there's probably nothing more unique to this great country than the fact that we have inalienable rights, we have individual rights, and that's as much as anything what sets us apart from all other countries under the heavens. Our inalienable rights, and then our just what do you call it, that spirit, that American spirit that we have to press forward and overcome things. So it doesn't surprise me that America overcame much of COVID, but because that's what we do. But to keep our rights that we have in this country sacred, to value them, to protect them with everything we can, with everything we have. That's what I feel like, as much as anything, that this committee was trying to do, recognizing, of course, the unique situation that we found ourselves in. And hopefully what we have done and the conversations we've had will only help us. There will be another emergency. I have no doubt of that. There will be another emergency. And as we move forward into it, hopefully we'll move forward with our best selves and our freedoms. And so thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I think it's important to understand that we're all on the same team here. We all wear the same jersey. Now, granted, on the sleeve of the jersey, there's going to be an R or a D, but we're on the same team and wearing the same jersey. And I think you can see from the conduct of all the people here who have differing opinions, different points of view. They're civil, they're cooperative, and they're all helpful. And that's Idaho. This is all about transparency and accountability. This isn't about the governor or the executive branch or the Department of Health and Welfare. This is about Idaho's government, and we are all a part of that. So we bear as much responsibility for what finally gets done with respect to government decisions as anybody else in this government. So we're all in it together. We're all on the same team. And I'll end by saying, God bless Idaho. Where else in this country could we come as representatives of the government and give ourselves from the top down a report card? Total transparency, total accountability. Some people may like what's in the report when it comes out. Some may not like what's in it, but they all have to say, wow, Idaho's government isn't hiding anything. As far as I know, we're the first state in the union to do this. And it's typical Idaho. It's vintage Idaho. And that's why I live here, quite frankly. Thank you to the LSO. This was one of the best examples of total support for the legislature I've seen in 10 years. So thank you for that. Thank you to our secretary and all the other good folks that I mentioned. Unless there's something pressing, we are adjourned.
All right, folks, you've seen the session here. It has ended, and the big news is that there is no second or third meeting. So we are no longer going to be carrying these things live because there won't be anything to carry. So that being said, I think the biggest news that came out of this this committee hearing today was the fact that there will be a report issued, and also that they have recommended that an emergency powers task force be created to deal with the language in the statute, which deals with the emergency powers of the executive branch and the fallout from that, because a lot of what happened in our state stemmed from the what was written in statute, and you saw there was some quite a bit of debate on whether or not those things were constitutional and whether or not they could have continued. And you saw some folks say, like, well, just continuing emergency powers shouldn't just happen willy-nilly. But then, of course, if there is something major like an invasion, like a wartime invasion, then maybe there is something different to be had there. So they're gonna form a task force specifically to look into the emergency powers, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, considering that this wasn't the scope of this particular committee. It was simply a study. And you saw Senator Dan Foreman there, the chairman of the committee, commend LSO for delivering all the materials they felt they needed in order to make these recommendations and issue a final report. Two things that I found a little bit, well, I guess I'm still waiting on. I didn't necessarily anticipate it happening right here. But because, we all want everything to happen at once, right? But one of the things, and I had several conversations with some committee members over the summer in anticipation of this particular, of these meetings, of these hearings, was wanting to be able to have the ability for people who experienced violations or people who suffered during the pandemic due to government restrictions, due to the actions of local agencies and so forth, to be able to stand before their representatives and air their grievances in a formal setting on the record. I don't think we've had that. Senator Foreman did make the remark that we're probably the first state in the country to be able to have this type of study to look at what the state did. And we weren't the most egregious of states. In fact, we were one of the better ones when it came to these types of restrictions and the things that went down. I mean, when you compare what went on in California, Washington, New York, almost the entire East Coast, we certainly those restrictions certainly weren't at their levels. But this is Idaho, and we have expectations, and there were things done that were not good, and especially when you think about the local agencies and what the school districts or city councils voted on making restrictions. So the accountability factor here is what I'm truly interested in. I know you're truly interested in it as well, and I really do think that there is an opportunity here to, when this report is issued, to have some accountability with the folks who are still there. I mentioned earlier during the break that it just boggles the mind that there are people who voted to institute mask mandates in their local jurisdictions who then got reelected just a year or 2 years later. Talk about accountability. That's the ultimate accountability, is kicking those people out, but it just doesn't happen. And if that's what the community wants, I guess that's what they want, and they're gonna have to deal with it when the next one goes around. The other thing that I'm looking forward to is, based on this report, there needs to be some resolutions. There needs to be some formal apologies made, even as high up as the governor. I don't know what kind of restitution you can give, but there has to be the ability for the people to feel we have to have the confidence that the leaders that we have that are in our executive branch, our judicial branch, and our legislative branch, that they are upholding the Constitution. Because right now, if you, quote, violate the Constitution, which this committee voted happened, what are the consequences for that? And so we will await the report. We will make sure everybody sees it and reads about it, and we're going to highlight things that are in there. And I'm going to continue these conversations with you, with our legislators, with the Attorney General, and figure out the next path forward. One, so that it never happens again, but more importantly, one of the ways for this to never happen again is to see people being held accountable. And I don't exactly know what that looks like yet. I mean, do you send a city councilor to jail for voting to mask people? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. Because it goes to their motive, right? Did they want to be a tyrannical person, or were they just, quote, following the science, or were they coerced themselves? Who knows, right? Who knows? I'm going to go through a couple of comments here. There was one that came in here from Brian Daly. He says, emergency powers were written almost 100 years ago. Martial law. Why is the flag gold fringed? This is not maritime law. You are on land. National flags suspend the U.S. Constitution and assumes one is guilty until proven innocent. Yeah, the emergency powers, a lot of the emergency powers apparently, as pointed out by Senator Van Orden, were written in our statute 100 years ago. So there's some updating that needs to happen. There's some language that needs to be refined, especially in light of what the people in power thought was okay to do during the pandemic. And you know, there's a part of me that really wants to just forgive and forget all this whole thing and say, yeah, you're right. You know, you didn't know at the time, but that's just gaslighting on my part. I truly believe that there was plenty of evidence out there, plenty of experts, if you will, who were pushing back on this quite early, and it never should have extended into 2021. The mass hysteria on masking and the shots and everything. That's another thing that this committee didn't seem to take up was the shot aspect of all this, and whether or not any of the mandates. I mean, those were coming from private businesses as well as the federal government, OSHA, and that sort of thing. So I don't know of any entities government-wise inside Idaho that were mandating that, but I could be wrong. But that's what this study should have been all about. So, all right, folks, I thank you for watching today. We're coming up on the 3-hour mark. Again, there will be no day 2 or day 3 of this committee. It was all taken care of in one day, which, you know, I mean, I have mixed feelings on that, right? I mean, there's a part of me that says, like, no, we need to dive into every single aspect of what went wrong and the violations that occurred. And maybe they were expecting a bit more debate or conversation on side. I will say there were 10 people up on the dais, and other than the chair, the two chairmen, the Democrats, I think, had the majority of the time speaking because they were up there busy defending the government, and so there weren't as many comments and airing of grievances on behalf of us by a lot of the legislators up there, But that being said, it's good to see government not draw out and have to pay extra for all the days on committees. So that's actually a good thing that they were able to wrap it up. But as long as they felt they've done their work on what this committee was supposed to be doing and issuing that final report. So be sure you're following us on all the social media channels and you subscribe to our newsletter. Head over to citizensallianceidaho.org and sign up for our newsletter. In order to keep informed. We will definitely keep tabs on when this report comes out. We will go through it with a fine-tooth comb And we will make our own recommendations as we confer with legislators and you as well. So I thank you for joining us. God bless you all, and we will see you next time we go on the air. Take care, everybody.
This bill, I think, it puts a stake in the ground that says we have a sovereign right to protect what's ours.